So you wanna be a picture book writer, then you gotta write picture books. And you're gonna need a bucket load of bright ideas for titles, plots, and hooks. If you're partial to prose or you're raring to rhyme, then repeat after me, it's a challenge, but I'm gonna tackle each story 1 month at a time with 12 by 12.
Do you want to take a deep dive into picture book craft to give your manuscripts the best chance of getting published? Consider Picture Book Summit, a world-class online conference for picture book authors and illustrators. Oceans of possibility await you on Saturday, October 3rd, 2026, alongside keynotes from award-winning speakers, author Derek Barnes, author Deborah Underwood, and Caldecott honor-winning author-illustrator Brian Lees. Register by August 27th and get $100 off the regular price at picturebooksummit.com/Julie. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the 12 by 12 Picture Book Podcast. I'm Julie Headland, your host, as well as published picture book author and the founder of the 12 by 12 Picture Book Writing Challenge. Today, it's just me, and I'm here to talk to you about a topic I've been thinking on almost nonstop for the past few months, and that is picture book hooks. You've probably heard a lot of agents and editors and other authors talking about the importance of having multiple hooks in your book to give it a better chance of being acquired. And as an author myself, that is certainly something that I've always thought about, but especially now, given the challenges in the picture book market. It's just very tough out there right now. I don't want to be discouraging about that because frankly, it's always tough, right? It's never been just a breeze and a half to get a picture book published. But there are a lot of unique pressures on the market at this moment. One of the biggest ones is the contraction that's happened in the school and library market. And what that means is that because of the culture of book banning and the budget cuts to arts programs, libraries, and literacy programs, that market has shrunk quite a bit, which is a very important market for picture books overall. With that, you've seen a domino effect of publishers that have merged or imprints that have just shut down. We've had editors, big name editors that have been let go. And all of that means that there's just contraction. And even the publishers remaining are being much more selective about how many picture books they're going to put on their lists. And they want to really focus on the books that they think have the best chance of reaching the widest audience possible. So that's where you hear a lot of talk about the importance of books having hooks. Now, before we get too much farther, let's talk about what we mean by hooks for purposes of this episode, because you'll often hear people talking about hooks as a synonym for a pitch. And that is the 1 to 3 sentence paragraph that you include in a query letter or on the jacket copy of a published book that intrigues, piques the agent or editor or reader's interest in that book. And that is a very important component of a query letter. I call it a pitch, but some people do call that a hook. And that's a perfectly valid use of the word hook, but that's not how we're using it here today. When I'm talking about hooks, I'm talking about entry points for the reader, which means anything that will cause an agent, an editor, or a reader, ultimately a child, what will draw them to your book as opposed to all the other books out there. So hooks are aspects of your book that make its marketability obvious, which is why you'll sometimes hear agents and editors refer to them as sales hooks, because in their mind, the more entry points you have, the more potential there is for sales. And entry points, multiples of them are important because we have different readers. So I'm going to pick one off the top of my head. Stalactite and Stalagmite, written and illustrated by Drew Breckmeyer, is one of the Caldecott Honor winning books this year. And there are a lot of hooks in this book, or entry points. For one, it's humorous, and a lot of kids and adults are drawn to humor. If this were a more straight up expository nonfiction about the way that stalactites and stalagmites are created, it would not appeal as much to those who prefer having laugh out loud funny and or characterization personification in their books, right? However, there are a lot of nonfiction hooks here. For instance, the book is essentially about the formation of life on Earth from the very beginning, when we're just talking about little teeny bacteria, to reptiles and amphibians, and then moving on to dinosaurs and humans and so on, all in the setting where we have this stalactite and stalagmite talking to each other. So you've got geology, you've got dinosaurs, you've got time, you have how friendship evolves. We've got these two that are sort of growing together and some of the things that concern them as that's happening. So there's a social emotional component there as well. So there's so many hooks in this book. So that's what we mean. So while some kids might be interested in it because it's got a dinosaur and because it's got, a woolly mammoth or whatnot, kids who are really interested in those perennial kind of favorite topics. But it would also appeal to, as an entry point, to kids who really are interested in learning about the facts of how life came about on Earth. And then the humor is another hook for kids who just like funny stuff, who like characters that talk to each other in a funny way. So that's what we mean by entry points. The more you have, the more different readers can hook into that book. So given that I, in the past, have also talked a lot about layers in picture books, you may be wondering, what's the difference between a hook and a layer? Are they the same thing? And they're not. There is overlap. And I'm going to give you a very simplistic way to think about the difference between them. So we talk about hooks as entry points, right? Imagine an iceberg. The hooks are the visible part of the iceberg. Those are the things that you know about the book or can surmise about the book before you've spent a lot of time with it. That's what's seen, in other words. Whereas the layers are what's below the surface, and the layers create the depth that make a book someone's favorite, that make them feel, that make them want to read it over and over again. So, lucky for you, we have two guides on these topics. A brand new one, which this podcast is launching, which is called the 12 by 12 Guide to Picture Book Hooks. And you can get that at 12by12challenge.com. That's 12x12challenge.com/PB hooks. Okay, 12by12challenge.com/PB hooks. But a couple of years ago, I also created the 12 by 12 guide to layers in picture books. And you can get that one at 12by12challenge.com/layers. But if you keep in mind, so there is overlap, right? A character can be both a hook and it's a layer. Illustration can be a hook and a layer, theme, and so on. And then there are some that are different, but you'll see that in the guides when you're looking at what constitutes a hook versus what constitutes a layer. And there is overlap, but again, if you think about them as what is seen versus what is more under the surface, both are equally important. I'm sure we've all had the experience of picking up a book because of the topic, or for me, one thing that automatically will hook me is a punny, funny title that I think, oh, what a great concept. One that comes to mind is Del Martian, written and illustrated by Lucy Ruth Cummins, right? Those I will just pick up no matter what. What do you mean you took a Dalmatian and a Martian and kind of combined them into one character? Oh my God, I have to read that, right? I love wordplay. Wordplay is a hook for me. Some kids might like books about whales or dinosaurs. Sometimes parents are looking for books about a certain topic. Say they're wanting kids to learn how to handle grief or maybe anxiety over the first day of school, right? So it's important to have those so you get people to pick up the book in the first place. And that's really important for sales. If you want somebody to buy a book sight unseen, the best way is to make it obvious that there's some really cool things in this book. But the layers are what make that book art, right? These are the things that create that beautiful alchemy of when a child absolutely falls in love with the book, either because of the words or the pictures or the way that book makes them feel. And there's layers of discovery, right? Where you might read it and then think, oh, I want to go back and look at the pictures, and or vice versa, or it surprises you in some way. So they're both very important. The layers are what create word of mouth, right? Where they will say, oh my gosh, this book is amazing. You really need to read it. So they're both important. But today we're talking about hooks specifically and why they're so important right now. And I talked about the tightness of the market, some of the contraction that's happening, and how publishers are really looking for books that they can sell to their own teams before these books even hit the market, right? Just in the past 4 months, I've heard from a number of agents and editors who are stressing that this is really important to either to consider signing a client if in the case of agents, or to acquire a book in the case of editors and publishers. If you go back to episode 3 of this podcast, you'll hear agent Adria Getz talk about what she's seeing now as editors telling her as an agent, we need a minimum of 3 commercial hooks before we can consider acquiring a book. So she talks about that in that episode and what that means and what she looks for as a result. I think it was Alvina Ling on the Book Friends Forever podcast. She just now has a brand new imprint, at Little Brown Books for Young Readers. And I think she's talked about how their process now, it might not be her, don't quote me on this, but there was one prominent editor, and I think it was Alvina, who said that their process has changed where now the whole company is together in acquisitions, whereas before it might have been first just a meeting of the editors and then the editorial team along with sales. But now you've got everyone there, including legal, marketing and sales, finance and so forth, because they're really trying to anticipate all of the possible eventualities so that they can hopefully get a book that's going to really sell well for them and make them money. This is a business after all. It doesn't necessarily mean that because agents and publishers are looking for multiple hooks, that means your book has to be high concept. Okay. And high concept means something that is just going to reach a mass audience, like Grumpy Monkey, something like that. Or, the Mother Bruce series, or high concept tends to be the kinds of books that you can say what they are in one sentence. A lot of times they end up being a series. They're usually led by a compelling character or concept. And by and large, they're mostly humorous. But just because agents and editors are looking for books that have multiple hooks doesn't mean your book has to be high concept. It just means that you have to provide a way for that publisher to sell it, quote unquote, by saying, here's what makes this book marketable. So when I was at the Bologna Book Fair recently, and if you want to know a lot more about that, you can go back to episode 23. But when I was there, I happened upon a panel discussion called Big Brave Books in the Era of Book Banning. And one of the panelists was Taylor Norman, who is now the executive director of Neil Porter Books at Holiday House. And what she said is it's almost like we're taking art and disguising it as a product. That's what editors have to do when they're trying to, quote unquote, sell a book to the rest of the team. Meaning, we know that this is a work of art and we know that it's going to change children's lives and it's important and it has literary merit and all of these other things. But we're going to put it in terms that a sales rep can take and make it marketable. And so we're going to get to some more examples of that in a minute, but I just didn't want anybody panicking like, oh my gosh, I don't write hugely commercial books. That's okay. You just need to have a way to translate some of those, say, less commercial ideas into the hooks that they're looking for. Recently, I hosted a webinar with agent Miranda Paul of Avidas Agency. Miranda is also an author herself. And the topic of her webinar was trade secrets, how to make your picture book idea more commercial and ultimately your manuscript more commercial. And she, as an author, said she felt she was especially qualified to talk about that because her own books are not hugely commercial. She's a more literary author. She writes about nature. She writes about science. She writes about social justice. But there are ways to make your ideas more commercial by adding hooks or at least thinking about the different kinds of hooks that you can include in your book to make them more appealing commercially. All right, last general thing about hooks is that you have hooks that are more child-facing, meaning things that kids would love about the books and make them want to pick it up, and hooks that are more adult-facing, things that an adult might be looking for in a book. And there is sometimes some tension between those two. But ideally, what you want is a book that appeals to both. So we're going to try to find a way to write across hooks that have both child-facing and adult-facing elements. So, for instance, if your book is too adult-facing, it might drop into being didactic, which doesn't appeal to kids as much. That said, if your book is simply silly and has lots of potty humor and there's no takeaway or deeper meaning, you might lose the parents. So this is where the art of multiple hooks comes in. And lucky for you, we have the guide to picture book hooks, which is launching today. And it's got an overview of 10 hooks, 10 types of hooks, I should say, because there are hundreds, thousands of hooks, luckily, but 10 types of hooks. And each week from now, if you sign up, if you get the guide to picture book hooks every week for the next 10 weeks, you'll get a little video and some mentor texts about this particular kind of hook. And I'm just going to quickly go through those in case, for whatever reason, you're like, no, I don't want the free guide on hooks. You'll know what the categories of hooks are. So we've got subject hooks. These are the most direct entry points. This is the topic of the book itself. So what's it about, right? This is where dinosaurs, princesses, animals, pirates, these all fall into the subject category. Character hooks are ones where the protagonist is the main event or the main draw into that book, who the book is about. Then there are situation hooks. These are tied to the story's premise or plot or the scenario in which the story takes place. So these are situations that kids often find themselves in, like first day of school, or they have a new sibling, or they're moving, or they've lost a loved one, and so on. Themes are the hook that's the universal truth or the takeaway of the book. For example, kindness, sharing, empathy, bravery, right? These are theme-based hooks. There are concept hooks. These are skills or facts or areas of knowledge that are woven into a story. So, for example, counting or the alphabet or STEM. And by concept, I don't mean just concept books, right? There are concept books where the primary purpose of that book is to teach a concept like the alphabet and so forth. And those too should have multiple hooks, but the concepts can also be a hook in a different kind of book, in a narrative nonfiction book, for example, might talk about seasons, somebody that, studied the way the atmosphere changes in the seasons or so forth. There might be a grammar component or a holiday or whatever. And by concept, I'm not talking only about concept books where the whole point of the book is to teach something, but the actual concepts themselves. Like, for instance, there are plenty of books that utilize opposites in the storytelling or math or STEM, science, right? we're talking about the skill or the facts, however they're incorporated into the story. Titles are a hook. I think this is one that not a lot of people think about, but if you have a great title, that ultimately will be a hook all by itself. Likewise, a great opening line can be a hook because if somebody is inclined to open a book and just look at the first couple of lines and you have one that just jumps right off the page, that's a hook. Tone and style. So this is akin to the voice layer, but what we mean here is these are things like humor, yes, but beyond just humor in general? Is it deadpan? Is it slapstick? Is it punny? Beyond lyrical, is it sweet and gentle, or is it onomatopoeia? Is it spooky and so forth? So these are all hooks that are related to the tone or the style in which the book is written. Illustration, huge, huge hook because often that's the first thing someone will see is the cover. People do judge books by covers, and so illustration is a hook. And when we get into sort of the weekly content around each one of these types of hooks, we'll talk about how to think about the illustration hook, even if you are an author only. And last but not least, structure. This is a hook that draws readers in based on the way the story is told. So these can be things like patterns, repetition, rhythm. It can be interactive elements and so on. So those are the 10 types of hooks. And again, you can grab the guide, which gives you an overview of each one of those types. That's at 12by12challenge.com/PB hooks. And then once you sign up for that, like I said, each week there will be a short video that comes. It'll give you a little bit more context around each of these hooks. And then if you want to take this even further into your own writing and how to apply these things in practice, because it is possible to have too many hooks, or it is possible to have the hooks competing too much against each other. And so, if you really want to talk about executing on the promise of the hooks in your manuscript, I highly, highly encourage you to join us this year at Picture Book Summit, which is, I'm one of the co-founders of, this is an annual world-class online conference where we have three amazing keynote speakers. But I specifically, for purposes of today's topic, I'll be teaching a workshop called Hook, Line, or Stinker, where I'm going to talk about the different kinds of hooks, how to identify what makes a hook kid-friendly, how to layer them effectively, meaning how to use multiples of them effectively, and how to avoid underdeveloped, unoriginal, mismatched, competing hooks. And the way we're going to do that in this workshop is go through examples of actual picture books that have done this well. And then I'm going to ask you to pull up your own manuscript or even multiple manuscripts to explore how you're using hooks and whether or not it's stinking or rising. Okay, that's really bad. Sinking. Because great hooks and combining them can really elevate or as we say, it can be overdone. So if you want to join us for Picture Book Summit, it is on October 3rd, 2026. This year, my workshop that I just described to you is one of two amazing workshops. The other one will be on page turns. We have three incredible keynote speakers, Derek Barnes, Deborah Underwood, and Brian Lees. We have agents and editors who will be taking submissions and lots more. I don't want to make this a commercial for Picture Book Summit per se, but you can find out all the information you need about it at picturebooksummit.com/Julie. And if you're listening to this before August 27th, you can use that link and get $100 off your ticket. If you're listening to this between August 27th and October 3rd, you can still get a ticket. Just go to the same link. And if you're listening to this after October 3rd, 2026, I'm sorry you've missed it, but there will be other opportunities. Anyway, so again, just reminders of the links. To get the picture book hooks, the guide to picture book hooks, go to 12by12challenge.com/PB hooks. If you're already a member of 12 by 12, you don't need to do that because it will be coming to you anyway as a benefit of your membership. If you haven't gotten in the past the guide to layers and you want that so you can review the difference between layers and book hooks, you can get that at 12by12challenge.com/layers. And if you want to join me for the comprehensive workshop that I'll be doing at Picture Book Summit, you can go to picturebooksummit.com/Julie, and that will just be one of the many things that you will learn and get on Picture Book Summit Day. So that's it for today. Lots more coming. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Ciao for now.
Do it together, so never you fear. It's a handy little way to help you kick into gear. You're amazing, exciting. Look out, 'cause you're writing 12 by 12.
12 manuscripts.
12 by 12.
12 picture books.
12 by 12.